This is Inside the Right. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, longtime Republican operative, Tim Miller. So, Tim, Donald Trump will come out of this latest primary, the Michigan primary, with about two-thirds of the vote. That makes four Republican primaries in a row where this self-proclaimed incumbent has failed to notch any sweeping victories, at least in the same way that Joe Biden has. Now, you've worked in Republican politics for a long time, almost 2 decades. If you're on Trump's campaign, are they seeing these warning signs? Like what's happening behind the scenes right now?
Yeah. So I think that two things are happening at the same time. The first, which is the good news for Trump, if we're just being honest, that he's won this primary in a landslide comparative to other Republican primaries, is kind of covering up the bad news, right? And so I think that a lot of folks in Trump world are at the moment focused on, dunking on Nikki Haley and Meatball Ron. I mean, you see this with his campaign manager is like still trash talking Ron DeSantis on Twitter for some reason, calling him pudding fingers. I mean,
Yep.
I enjoy the intra-MAGA fighting as much as anybody, but it doesn't seem like he's got the eye on the ball
Right.
so much if he's putting that out. So I think that like at least between now and the next few weeks until they get the actual delegate total, I think they're going to focus on that kind of top line victory, which is, I mean, we just have to admit, like resounding. If you look at the George Bush 2000 versus McCain, McCain gave him a fight, but Bush won, I think everybody would consider in a landslide, and Trump is going to beat that margin significantly. Okay, but here's the problem that is underneath the hood, which is he is not doing well at all with the about one third. It's going to be a little less than that in Michigan, but whatever it is, one quarter, even to be generous, of voters that are out there voting against him, and those voters do not seem like voters from Republican years past. If you look at their exit poll responses, in that many of them don't seem ready to fall in line with Donald Trump. Many of them seem very gettable for for Joe Biden. So I think that is the number one, I think, red flag for Trump folks that the people over in the Trump camp who are focused on the general election are certainly looking at and worried about and focused on trying to get those voters in line. And then the other one is just that the poll numbers at the top line, he's underperformed his poll number in every state so far, and I think that's something to continue to monitor for sure.
I mean, when you really think about this, like the amount of voters that any Republican candidate could afford to lose, like the amount of defections that they can afford to have, can you talk about like the chasm between that number and the number that Donald Trump is seeing right now? Because, it was in Iowa 51%, New Hampshire in Iowa he got 51%, so he lost 49%. In New Hampshire he lost, I think it was 44%. These numbers are staying pretty steady. These are not like 2 or 3% defections. These are like massive amounts of Republican primary base voters, the people who should be gimmies.
Yeah, I think that look, if he's losing double digit Republican voters in the fall, like that's the ball game, right? And so that's just not a number that you can afford to lose. I think the best spin that Trump people could put on this is, at least in South Carolina and New Hampshire, some of these voters weren't really actually Republicans or voting the Republican primary. There are people that just hate Donald Trump and were undeclared or independent and turned out to vote. So that takes that number down a little bit. Now you're still looking at 30%, right? Like you're still looking at a significant number, even once you've kind of cut out those Democratic voters. And so then that's the question. Can Donald Trump win two-thirds of the Nikki Haley vote? Sure, he could. Yeah. But I mean, that's going to be a challenge. And that is going to be a big fighting ground for the general election. And it seems like a big ripe target for Biden's campaign when you can say, hey, we only have to get about a third, right, of these Nikki Haley voters. You don't have to get all of them, even 20, a quarter of them, gets us a long way to winning this general election. And these voters in the exit polls have shown that they're, they live in the reality-based community, right? Like the thing, we haven't seen exit polls from Michigan yet, but the South Carolina exit polls, for one example, over 80% of voters who thought that Joe Biden's election was legitimate in 2020 and think the economy is either fine, good, or excellent, voted for Haley. So these are people that are they're hearing reality, right? Like
Right.
they are not in a Newsmax bubble, right? Like there's a way to reach them. If they are recognize that like we are not in an American carnage Great Recession, that Dominion voting machines didn't steal the election for Donald Trump, right? Like if they're hearing reality, that means that they are persuadable and gettable. And so that's I think the most encouraging thing for the Biden folks, and you can kind of see that number. It's not even like they have to win half of them, but you just
Right.
have to get a significant chunk.
Right. Well, the problem too for Republicans is that any comparisons here are apples to apples. Like both Donald Trump and Joe Biden, both guys are running as incumbents. Both are contending with primary challengers. Although I'll concede that Dean Phillips is hardly the bulwark that he thinks he is.
Pun intended there with the
Pun intended,
bulwark.
exactly. So isn't it difficult to claim that Trump is doing well when Joe Biden is notching wins that are 30, 40 points above him?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that they can claim that he's doing well. Again, it's like, what is your comparison mark, right? This is all about narrative and spin and putting the best face on it, right? So the Trump folks are going to say, well, look, we're going to compare this to Mitt Romney in 2012 and McCain in 2008, and look at how much better we're doing than those candidates. And that's fair at some level, though, again, the hostility among the voters that were opposed to the front runner was not as great in those times. But comparing apples to apples to Biden, it's not a good look right now. And I think that in theory, Biden could have had a stronger challenge. A lot of people agitated for it. Prominent people agitated for it. David Axelrod agitated for it, right? Ezra Klein recently. So, it's not as if nobody suggested that someone challenge Biden, and it's just that Biden's strength with the Democratic base, with a few potential pitfalls that he's going to have to worry about cleaning up here between now and the general election. But his strength is just greater than Trump's with the base voters. And then the question comes down to, okay, what about motivating voters? What about the independent voters, right? So there are other elements to this at play in the general election, but at least as far as standing within the party is concerned and who has a bigger, black eye to deal with, it's clearly Trump at this point.
By the way, for anybody watching right now, if you enjoy this series Inside the Right, the best way to support Tim is to subscribe to The Bulwark. That's his YouTube channel. He's on that channel throughout the week. So I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Again, that's the best way to support what he does. That's a big part of what we're trying to do with growing this ecosystem that is working, from all parts of our coalition to make sure that Donald Trump doesn't take office again in 2024. Tim, at this point, can you help reconcile what Nikki Haley's goal is? Because, is she more setting herself up for 20, the more she stays in this race, which is presumably to help set herself up for 2028, isn't she also simultaneously doing herself more damage by continuing to be a thorn in Trump's side?
Yeah, that's kind of a psychological question more than a political question. So I'm not a total expert on that, but I'm going to do my best here. I've talked about her campaign as she's basically running a vampire campaign, right? Like her campaign is dead, and yet she is still walking around,
Right.
sucking blood from various other candidates. And
Yeah.
um, and the hope is that it's going to be Trump that suffers the bloodletting. And so far she's been saying the right things. I'm concerned that eventually she comes around and endorses Trump and tries to help move those voters we've been talking about towards his camp rather than towards Biden's, and that would be the worst thing that she could do. But increasingly, I'm wondering whether that's the path. I think that her 2028 hopes are basically zero. I mean, she'd have to be delusional to think that this party is going to come back around to her. There's an interview she did with Dana Bash on CNN tonight where she kind of acknowledges this and says that maybe it's possible that this party is just moving away from me. And so I think that she recognizes that, and she's out there among the voters, right? I mean, politicians are narcissistic, but you'd have to be kind of deep in the bag to think that this party, is going to turn around and go for Nikki Haley next time after, just the way that she's gotten crushed now in every primary, and she's only won 5 counties over the course of 4 states. And so I think that hopefully she sees this as a way to kind of become a leader of this rump faction within the Republican Party that still wants old school, classic, compassionate conservatism. Maybe, it gives her an opportunity to do third party stuff down the line. I don't think that during this election. And maybe it's just kind of something for her to do for attention. This gets into the psychological element of this. Like, what's her other option? Going to be on boards, getting on Zoom calls every day, having to go grocery shopping, right? Like, this is maybe a better life than that by comparison. So, I think that the big question for Nikki Haley is kind of what she does between now and the convention. And frankly, I think that's going to be more important for her legacy and for what happens in the general election than what she's done between the start of her campaign and now.
Yeah, I mean there is always the prospect of, she's got to sell a book at some point, and she
Yeah.
probably wants a contributorship on ABC or CBS.
Yeah, I think that she does want all that. And I think that, the more you demonstrate that you have a strong, even if it's a minority in the party, right? It's not nothing. Like, so this is kind of the conundrum that she faces, right? She's not going to be the leader of this party. Not this time, not if Trump dies, not if he goes to jail, not in 2028. They're going to find somebody else that's more MAGA and fits the
Yeah.
bill. But you can be the leader of, say, if you go to, you can have influence, you can have, you could make yourself interesting as far as selling yourself to a TV station or to something else. If you say, "Hey, I'm the leader of this group that is significant. It's a significant chunk of the Republican Party. It's a significant swing voter electorate. I can influence this group and have, and maybe down the line, she's a young woman, relatively speaking, things change, right? And I think about Pat Buchanan, 1988. He runs kind of a hopeless campaign against H.W. Bush as a populist right winger. Like, his vision doesn't come to fruition for another 28 years when Donald Trump comes around, right? And so, maybe that's kind of having an influence over the direction of things is the only motivation, and I think that's a legitimate one to have.
Well, that influence notwithstanding, the fact that she isn't going to be, that she doesn't really, that she's not going to have any political power moving forward, at least not in the immediate, at least not in the immediate future, while they're still clinging on to this notion that Donald Trump is their salvation. Do you think that she endorses Trump at the end of this?
I really don't know.
We do predictions
I'm
here,
getting
so
hope.
with
Yeah,
these we'll do
sorry.
predictions here, and these things will haunt you. So.
I know. So I've been burned so many times, and everybody's disappointed me that I ever worked with or ever worked for, and so it's hard for me to be hopeful. So I've always assumed she was going to come back around to Trump, but man, I don't know. The longer she stays in, I'm starting to let myself hope a little bit. It's kind of like the Dumb and Dumber thing. I'm saying there's a chance that she doesn't support him. There's a chance, but I wouldn't count on it. How about that?
All right, so let's finish off with this. I do want to talk about the polling a little bit because right now it's looking like Donald Trump will beat Nikki Haley by about a 40-point margin. Some of his polling at 538, he was up 58 points. Real Clear Politics had him up on an average of 62 points. So 62 to 40, I mean, this is a 20-point gap in the polling. How significant do you think that this kind of a thing is going to be as we head toward the election if we're seeing polling disparities that great right now?
Yeah, and this is a bit of a trend. So if you look at just the 538 polling average, Iowa had him plus 37, he only wins by 30. New Hampshire had him plus 18, he only wins by 11. South Carolina had him plus 28, he only wins by 20. So off everywhere. Like, the closest it's been looks like about 7 points overstating Trump. And so I think there are a couple things that we can take away from this. One, that maybe doesn't have anything to do with the general election is I think that there is a motivated anti-Trump base that has come out to vote against him. Some of whom are my people, like independents and former Republicans, who have said, F this guy. I know Haley doesn't have a chance, but I'm going to turn out more. And pollsters have kind of missed that energy among, suburban voters who want to turn out against Trump. So that's one thing that's happened. So that's a good sign that there's still this anti-Trump energy out there. But the other thing that I think is worth just continuing to keep an eye on, it's possible that Trump's polling number is kind of his high watermark. And this is just a theory that is out there in polling as we continue to monitor. And basically, it says that if you're for Trump, you're going to tell a pollster that you're for Trump, right? And then there's another group of people out there that really doesn't like Trump at all, but right now aren't telling pollsters that they're for Biden or for Haley. And maybe it's because they are, unhappy with Biden, are unhappy with the direction of the country, and they're kind of just registering their frustration in these polls. Maybe the stakes don't feel as high right now, because we're still far away from the election, especially for more casual voters, people who aren't following this day to day. And so I think it's something to continue to monitor. If like Trump, continues to do this poorly and with the undecided voters, and those voters continue to break away from him. This happened in 2020, it happened in 2022, and now it's happening to him in the primary. That could be a good sign for Democrats in November, and I think that we should monitor this trend as Super Tuesday comes up next week.
And that's exactly what we'll do. So, for everybody watching right now, again, first of all, if you want to see and hear more from Tim, make sure to subscribe to The Bulwark. Again, I'll put that link right here on this screen and also in the post description of this video. And of course, subscribe here if you want to see more from this series and the regular coverage. So, with that said, I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Tim Miller.
This is Inside the Right.